We're going to start a new restoration here. This is the KZ650. I don't know exactly where I'm going to go with it yet, but it's pretty complete, and it's not going to take, you know, the soda blasting and all that extra stuff that I had to do on the KZ1000. So, you know, because it looks pretty damn nice. I think it'll brighten up, and actually just very minor polishing on these side covers. So I'm kind of steering towards doing it in the original stock version, perhaps keeping this 4-1, which probably will sound real good, and it's in good shape. I mean, it really will clean up. So just have to see how it goes. First step is to get it running and see what it sounds like, what it drives like. Typical first step. So let's get tearing into those carburetors. One other thing, this has 27,000 miles, which is fairly low. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get in to look at that tank, but I have a parts manager who he is ready and willing and able to research anything I'm going to need on this project. And as you can see, he's very excited about it. He's always there, and so if you think that's enthusiasm, that's just the utmost in enthusiasm. Just totally turns his back to you. So we'll get the parts manager on this and get us some carb rebuild kits. A couple of things that just first jumped out at me is this is going to the rectifier, and it's just unplugged, or the plug just disintegrated. Probably more like it just disintegrated. So I've got to put a new plug on there. Then the other thing, I got the little individual carburetors off, and when I pulled the tank, the coils were missing, and I probably took them out at some point, put them on something else. So I have a box of KZ650 stuff, and I just happen to have the coils, and now they have the little numbering on them. You know, this is number 2, number 1, and number 3 and 4. So I like that. I also have a Dynatech set of coils, the 3 ohm, and a little ballast resistor that I could put on if I wanted to. But this is just to get, next I'm gonna pull the spark plugs, and I'm gonna see if I'm getting spark. And after that, I'm not really thinking that the carburetors are gonna do anything. So I'll probably just prime through the holes and try to start it that way, just see if it runs, before I go to the extent of doing the carburetors. I found that if you try to do a compression check or a leak down test after a bike's been sitting, that it doesn't really work out well. There's probably like dirt built up in the valve seats. God knows what, but once they run and you heat cycle them a couple of times, it's amazing how that compression comes back. So I'm not going to bother with the leak down unless this thing just doesn't want to pop at all. So the next step is to get the spark plugs out, see if we've got ignition, and of course I've got to do this first. So I'll do this plug, and then I'll pull the spark plugs, check for ignition. I'm going to go a little deeper into the soldering just because sometimes I like to show people maybe how I do things, and soldering something that is, it's not difficult at all, but it just takes the proper stuff. And what I use is I'm using a Weller. It's a nice little soldering iron. It's not going to do huge battery, well, it'll do almost everything in a motorcycle, but automotive it's probably not powerful enough, but for what I use it for, it's perfect. And I've had that for years. I also have this, and it allows you to, it's weighted so you don't have to hold it. It'll hold both the wires together. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to break this apart and see if I can save as much of this wire as possible. Look at that, half of it's already gone. Here's the pieces, but I was able to keep these. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on either a 3-prong plug or just individual plugs. So next time you're on eBay and you got time to wait because they come from China, I just got these packages. I've got a few other types, but they work just fine. If I'm going to buy one or two, you know, the cost to get this many is marginally more. So I'm going to give it a try with a 3-pronger here. And I say give it a try because you don't do it every day, but let's see how it goes. So we're just going to snip these off. It's really easy. It's yellow to yellow, yellow to yellow, and black and yellow to yellow. So I'm going to need to cut these about the same length. Back off some of this black tape. Oh my gosh, look, you can actually see it's yellow. So, strip all these. When I've got them all stripped, we'll solder them. So, there's a little bit of a change in plan. This, let me see if I can get you up to it. Alright. This, I just looked up here. This is not right. This isn't fitting in there right. So I went out to my parts bike, and there's the right one. Now this probably would have worked, but I'm going to go out and I'm going to cut off the other part of this plug, and then I'm just going to solder these 3 right here onto the plug, and done and done. That way I can change it out with the stock one later. It's just going to be a nicer installation. So that's what we're going to gear up to do. So the first thing that you want to do, and you can fast forward this if you're a good solderer, you can just fast forward it anytime, but put a little bit of rosin here, a little bit on each one. Wipe off the tip in the sponge. And then just give it a little, let it sit there until it kind of soaks into the threads. You'll see at some point it'll just drop. There we go. There we go. Alright, I tinned these, and I've got the heat shrink. So what I need are 2 pieces of red, and 1 black. The red's go on that yellow. These are the hots coming from the generator, or whatever you want to call that in there. So I will use my little stand here. And we'll start with one of the yellows. See if I can get this on here. And just get them close like that. Get the heat shrink on. And I tend to put, probably I do too much of this resin, but a little bit on there. And it should just melt together, as long as your stand doesn't get out on you. So there it is. The stand has got a little ridge right there. Now I've got the next one lined up here. Always wipe off the tip on that little piece of sponge. And just a touch there. There we are. Nice solid connection. A little bit of resin. Yeah, and that one doesn't want to go. There's a lot of pressure from these other two. So I've got to get a little bit better grip on here. So what I'm going to do now is put a little bit of that resin on there, rosin. And I'm going to dab a little bit more. I'm going to dab a little more solder on it. Just to get it completely sealed up. So that's the soldering portion. So now they're covered by the shrink, the heat shrink. Just use a heat gun here. And we'll get them all sealed up. And that's about it. So I'm going to replace that, put this on there, plug them all in. Hopefully we get spark. I've got the carburetors off, and what I found was they weren't really that bad. They were fairly clean inside. There was a little rust, and I'm soaking some of the parts one by one, all the brass, But this doesn't have any spring on that. So I think I have one that will fit in there. And then I've got some new base gaskets that I bought for another bike. I always buy 2 or 3 just so that I can use them, and I'm going to use them here. But this is always a problem. Now, it could swell up, and when that's what happens, sometimes you start these bikes up, let them run, and they're just leaking fuel out of the carbs like you can't believe through here, because this piece has some rubber. Basically, it's got a rubber end on it. So if you could imagine, this piece right here that goes into the carb on either side is rubberized, and that rubber dries up and shrinks. So it's just sitting in there. I mean, it's loose. That's loose. So I know there's going to be gas pouring through there, but sometimes they'll seal up. And you can see right here, these actually are rubberized the whole way. Those are rubberized on the exterior and the interior. And I know that they're loose. So the idea is to just get it running to make sure that this thing's going to run before I go too far. But I'm going to clean these up. I sprayed all of the orifices out, and by not taking them completely apart, I don't have to adjust the throttles on each one of them. So I'm going to put it back together with the original parts that I can clean up. I've got some additional 15s for the pilots. If there's one here that's pretty plugged, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get that one unplugged. And I'll put it back together. I'll put it back on. Now there's a lot of corrosion in here, and the points themselves weren't too far off, but I think they were corroded to the point that they really didn't didn't completely disconnect. So I don't think I was getting spark for that reason. But I had to take the coils off because I wanted to check the valves. I pulled the cover. I checked the clearance on the valves, and they were in spec. The 19 millimeters, like 1 millimeter out, but loose is okay. Loose, it'll run. Tight, it's going to let air pass by the valve, and you won't get compression. So I think that there's just a little bit of dirt or buildup on the valves where I'm not getting the compression I should, and that goes away after you start it up and run it a few times. It almost cleans up a little bit most of the time. So I'm going to hope for that. We'll get this set of carbs back on and see if we can put some gas to them, and hopefully it runs. Alright, it's back together. Got the coils back on, carburetors back on. This is what I had to do for the throttle cable. They had jerry-rigged something with some crimp electrical fittings or something in there. I think you can see it. So I've got some cable work to do, but that's no big deal. Anyhow, I've got my gas. I got a towel under there because the fittings, the rubberized fitting in there, it's not holding, and it might swell up overnight. But I found one online, an aftermarket aluminum that's got 2 rubber O-rings on it, on either side actually, and they also make them for the one that joins the 2 carburetors, so you got your whole inlet track covered there. So it's ready to fire up and see what happens. So we will give it a try. All right, ignition. Jumper screwdriver. I haven't got the starter button to work yet. Let's see what we got here. So we've got some heat. So we're getting heat on all four. So we've got all four. They're all four firing. Getting a little smoke, which is not unusual since this thing's been sitting forever. So I'm just going to let it run and let it get up to temperature so I can change the oil. And I'll service it that way and then move on probably to some new points, but I'm going to have to drive it and make sure that the gears all work. So that's the next step, is to makeshift my little Motion Pro gas tank on the handlebar and just put a seat on it and take it down the street and make sure that every gear works in it. And if it does, then it's time to tear it apart and do a restoration. All right. Look at that. That is some black oil. Pretty darn black. Nice and watery. It's been in there a while. And it's pretty dirty under there, huh? Got a lot of work to do. But it all starts now. And so I'm gonna post the first video, the part 1 here pretty soon. One of the more grimy jobs is getting down in here and getting this clean. Even though I'm probably going to pull the motor, I just want to get up in here and get all this clean. This gives you kind of an idea of what this old dog's looking like and what this exhaust looks like before I go through it, take everything out, take it apart, clean it. But it sure helps to have the big stuff taken off. So that's what we're doing now. It's all cleaned and pretty easy to work with now. You know, up in there you can see what color wires are instead of them all just looking dark. And the fork legs, we can see the condition, and they're actually in pretty good condition. I'm gonna see what I can do about just a polish. I mean, a lot of this is really clean. I mean, the spokes, the rim, the fender, you know, like the headlight ring. Now the yellow in the headlight, we're gonna go through that process of cleaning, but just getting up in here and making it simple and easy and not so grimy to pull apart. So what I've got is the carburetors are off, the coils are off, the exhaust is off. I've got the tail section that's off. We've got a broken shaft here on the turn signal. I'm probably going to need to do a little polishing, and I might just go for new spokes and lace this wheel, only because I can get in there, I can get it clean, but it's just not going to have a shine. But I definitely am going to try first. The shocks are in amazing condition. They're just amazing. I mean, just for what this bike looked like, those shocks and this pull bar, the rear fender, all of this stuff is in great shape. Rear tail light. So I'm gonna have a little easier time than most with this one. And I can see that I'm gonna need to paint the frame. You know, I definitely could bring it back, and it's still not out of the question. And maybe just the center stand. But this swing arm, you know, there's just nothing you're going to do with dressing or anything on that. It needs to be painted, this rear swing arm. You've got a little chipping here. So I think this was welded on. This is a little tab for the 4-into-1 header. This piece down here, definitely going to need paint. But the rest of the frame is black, and some of the dressing and stuff that I have, it will bring it back. So I don't know. I'm going to have to just think about that. The chain guard is in perfect condition, just perfect condition. And a lot of times they're all bent up, beat up. I've got to do something with this. Someone welded a foot onto the existing foot, and I don't mind the idea, but at least they could have rounded off the corners. I'm gonna have to do a little work on that, just make it look a little more factory. But I like the big pad. I like it, so I'm gonna work with that. And the engine itself, you know, just a quick clean. the worst part about this engine is this valve cover, which that's the easiest thing to take off. You know, in here it's not a whole lot of stained in oil, things like that. So I could probably just polish, you know, the covers. They'll come out looking a little less shiny than this chrome piece, but almost new. I mean, they'll look new. And that might just be enough. Now that the exhaust is off, I can clean in here. You can see what it looked like before I couldn't clean it, and then what it looks like after cleaning. So, depending on whether the motor comes out or not, I still can get in there and I can get that cleaned up and looking good. And then it's covered by the exhaust, so it doesn't have to be perfect. So, it is getting the teardown done now, and we will move on to a huge parts list, and you know, gonna have to find quite a few parts online or whatnot. So this is a really good time to probably end part one. And so for the fellas out in Shingletown, the KZ650, which, oh, by the way, I thought it was orange. If you look, that looks orange, doesn't it? Now I had orange fenders before. I have one, a tailpiece, but when I pulled this and cleaned it, it's red. And what's funny is the tank looks orange. I don't know whether that tank's just sun faded too. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's sun faded. You know, that's brighter. This is probably more the color, but it still looks orange compared to that. But this definitely looks red. So I'm sure it's just whatever red they offered in that year. And I'm gonna have to, you know, this is probably the one tank that I may not have to do a Coswell sealant on the inner tank, you know, line the tank. But I've just, every time I don't do it, I get it all painted, I put it together, I throw gas on it, and all of a sudden it decides to rust through from the inside with a weep hole. And the Yamaha R5 did it. And that R5 I had to do the Coswell tank treatment on the inside after it was painted, and it wasn't difficult, but it sure is a lot easier when you're not having to worry about a little bit of that epoxy getting on your brand new paint. So I'm going to decide on that here too. But for the end of number one, we've got a running, and it runs good, runs really good, a running KZ650 that we're going to bring back to stock. I've pretty much decided that it's going to be a stock KZ650, and I like the idea of the single disc, going with the drum brake and the spokes. I've got probably 3 sets of dual disc, you know, and then the single disc for the rear, which I could definitely put together. This is set up where I could mount everything I need as far as making it a rear disc and dual disc in the front with mag wheels that came off of the 650 SR. But this bike is just got so much going for it. So I am really leaning towards the stock configuration, the stock color, mainly because the stock color is it's a red, and I think it's this snap-on red, not the orange. I think if you look at this snap-on, I think that's what I'm going to end up with when I get that factory color code. So a nice bright red KZ650. I might even go with a stock bars, but probably won't, because in a period correct 650, the flat bars, foam grips, 4-into-1 and pods were like what everyone did. So that's more than likely what I'm going to do, because I don't have the whole factory air box. It just was missing. So I'm going to try, see how hard it would be to get a factory air box. It won't be tough, but if it's expensive, then probably just go the pods. I'm used to the pods, and I know how to tune for the pods. This is all set up jetted right, so I could just match the jetting and be really close with pods right off the bat. So just decisions. So if any of you out there in my listening areas such as Shingletown, if you think that it should go pods, flat bars, foam grips to go with the 4-in-1, let me know. And also, if One-Eyed Jerry wants to have just one case guard, I can understand that, but I think I'm going to need to take that off, so maybe you can ring in on that too. I don't know, maybe it would be cool with one case guard, but only One-Eyed Jerry is going to know over in Shingletown whether that'll fly. So this is the end of the first part of the KZ650.